A few months back now, I did a video on the Far Cry games released exclusively for the consoles, and then I realised that at this point I've actually covered every single main game in the series. Still a bit of a ways off until we get Far Cry 6 though, so in the meantime I thought I'd go back and do a video ranking the series in what I think is the order from worst to best. So let's take it all into account, from a Hawaiian shirt wearing Jack Carver in 2003 to the customizable captain in Far Cry New Dawn. Grab some popcorn, a beer and a machete, let's get lost in an open world map and do this.
Food, clothes, guns.
Buy a girl a drink.
I'm Carmina.
Why are you here?
I'm so sorry about this.
So right at the bottom of the list is Far Cry Vengeance, and this one was a bit of a no-brainer. It's hands down the worst game in the entire series, and I don't think anyone's gonna argue with that.
How long have you been with the rebels?
I'm not that kind of rebel, pal.
I'm not your pal, you bastard guy.
Released exclusively for the Nintendo Wii, Far Cry Vengeance is defined as a remake of Evolutions, even though it's really just more like an alternate version of the same game. To see why this thing sucks so, you don't have to do much more than just look at it in action. For a 2006 Wii game, this thing just looks atrocious. The performance is absolutely horrible too, with the kind of frame rate that can cause epileptic fits, along with engine issues like texture and environment pop-in. It's a first-person shooter, but the controls have been adapted to work with the Wii's nunchuck and remote. Fling the nunchuck up in the air to jump and swing it down to melee attack. It all sounds fine on paper, but when it's put into action, it's kind of not. It just kind of makes you look like you've got Tourette's. It's really just a worse off version of both Instincts and Evolution, taking the worst parts of both of those games like it's some kind of bad idea buffet. On a positive side though, it does have one of the best lines in any video game ever made.
I'm not your pal, you bastard guy.
But that's not enough to save this thing from being easily the worst the series has ever gotten, so far anyway. After this, we've got Far Cry New Dawn. Now, I don't think New Dawn is a bad game, but the reason it's so far down on this list is that it doesn't really do anything all that new, or even add in enough new content in my opinion to be even considered a full game. Like a lot of people said back when this thing came out, it really should have been DLC. Reusing a smaller version of the map from Far Cry 5, New Dawn takes place after the events in that story, which culminated in two equally depressing endings involving a nuclear apocalypse. As a customizable character, you're trying to rebuild the world, helping friendly groups of survivors by donating to them copious amounts of resources, along with dealing with a bandit faction called the Highwaymen, led by the completely unthreatening twin sisters Mickey and Lou.
But if you make problems, well, Pops taught us what to do with problem makers.
Problem makers need to be solved.
There were some bare bones RPG elements introduced, with weapons and enemies having different levels, but it didn't really make the higher level enemies any smarter, just buffed them up with more health points and armor. Capturing outposts formed a really big component of the gameplay loop too, and you'd need to do this multiple times to acquire enough fuel for all of your upgrades. To circumvent this, they even added in a really lazy microtransaction system, where you could buy all of this stuff without even having to actually go out and earn it in the game. It wasn't all bad though. I mean, I think the engine looked great, and some of the new weapons like the sword blade launcher were really fun to use. The new companions were also fun to play with too, but overall it couldn't really help feeling like a lesser version of Far Cry 5.
That is the best death scene ever.
Next up is Far Cry Instincts, released in 2004 for the Xbox and then later in 2006 for the Xbox 360. Instincts is a remake of Far Cry 1, released barely a year after the original, and it's the same plot, with Jack Carver taking Valerie Cortez to a mysterious island in Micronesia for some seemingly innocent sightseeing. Soon enough though, she disappears and Jack is then under attack by soldiers and has to flee onto the island. He soon comes into contact with Doyle and eventually has to rescue and work alongside Valerie to bring down Dr. Krieger and his band of mercenaries led by Crow. But the whole thing's kinda like the edgier evil twin of the original game. In the original, Jack was just an ex-Special Forces soldier that Valerie hired because of his military training. But this time he got dishonorably discharged, became an illegal arms dealer, and is on the run from the mob now in Micronesia to avoid getting whacked. Crow is back again too, but instead of just being some cheesy Hollywood bad guy with a cowboy hat,
Am I understood? Yes, sir. I'm heading out.
turns out he's now an ex-apartheid officer. And if you don't know what the apartheid was, well, go and ask your parents.
I'm heading out.
Probably the coolest aspect of the game though is the new abilities that Jack's got after being injected with Krieger's serum. This comes in the form of new abilities during the game, like being able to attack enemies with your razor-sharp claws, being able to track enemies by their scent, and eventually you can also run super fast and jump higher than normal. But it's all linked to a slow-ass adrenaline system that just takes forever to recharge. The other thing is that this is also a lot more linear than the original game. You're basically just moving down what's essentially one large corridor for each level. I mean, you are on a jungle island, but going too far off the beaten path, you're just gonna run into impassable hills and trees that kinda cordons you back towards where the game wants you to go. The controls in this thing though are the real challenge, man. They're just absolute dog shit. If the input delay isn't enough, when driving vehicles, accelerating, braking, and turning left or right is all done with the left thumbstick. And you want to know why this is a bad thing? Because half the time you keep veering to the left or the right when you're just trying to accelerate because of how loose the thumbstick is. Combine it all with aiming acceleration, sporadic checkpoints, brain dead AI, and long and often boring levels, and the whole thing's just one big pile of shit.
I'm heading out.
Still, I commend them for being able to get it running on a console in the first place, and credit where it's due, that is pretty impressive. Next up on the list is Far Cry 4, released in 2014. And again, like New Dawn, it's kinda low on the list because it just feels like a lesser version of another Far Cry game, this time Far Cry 3. In Far Cry 4, you're playing as RJ Garley, heading home to the fictional country of Kyrat to spread his deceased mother's ashes. Of course, as is always the case in every Far Cry prologue, things go to hell, and RJ ends up having to work with a militia group to crumble the armies of a dictator named Pagan Min and reclaim the country. Pagan Min, though, might just be one of the most likable characters in the entire goddamn franchise. Voiced by Troy Baker, this dude just steals every scene he's in, and even though he's supposed to be the bad guy, he's far more charismatic and likable than any of the other characters in the entire game.
Stay here, enjoy the crab rangoon, don't move, I'll be right back.
Throughout the campaign, you're forced to choose a rebel commander to side with, either the more traditional thinking Sabal or the more progressive, forward-thinking Amita.
We don't have time for tourists.
Both sides having their own faults though, like Sabal has no issues with antiquated customs like child brides.
Get to the OT factory and burn it down.
Amita, on the other hand, has no issues with turning the entire country into a drug state if it helps her people prosper.
It's morally bankrupt.
Better than being literally bankrupt.
Annoyingly too, this is one of the few games in the series that doesn't let you skip cinematics, so get used to hearing these people talk for 5 or so minutes straight.
Look, I overreacted back there.
Other than that though, it really just felt like Far Cry 3 with a different backdrop. Same old gunplay, same old enemy AI, taking over the same outposts, climbing radio towers and all that kind of stuff. Those few times you went high into the mountains on a gyrocopter, or even further up, dealing with sub-zero temperatures and using a blizzard as cover from your enemies was pretty intense. But I think it's just window dressing for what felt more like Far Cry 3.5 than Far Cry 4. Now, people might be shocked to see Far Cry 5 so far down on this list, considering if you ever saw my review, I had a lot of nice things to say about it. But from this point on, I think every game on this list is good, so don't take it too personally, you little bitch. Anyway, the story in Far Cry 5 is also pretty interesting. This takes place in the fictional Hope County, where a bizarre cult called Eden's Gate has the entire area pretty much under martial law. It's a bit like Outlast 2, but without all of the shitty weather and the genital mutilation. But after trying to extract the cult's leader, Joseph Seed, it of course all goes awry and you're stuck there for the foreseeable future. Getting to Joseph then involves working with the locals and taking out the territories occupied by his siblings, one by one. Each sibling's having their own backstories and quest lines you'll need to complete, and some of these subplots are actually really cool. Like the one where you're basically brainwashed into becoming a sleeper agent, or the one where you get hypnotized by his sister Faith, who looks like the type of chick you'd see at a Burning Man festival. New to the game was the companion system, which is kinda similar to the beast in Far Cry Primal, where you can recruit NPCs to help you out during gameplay. like an edgy girl with the bow, a sweet old lady who hovers above you in a combat chopper with absolutely no sense of subtlety, through to a kelpie chonker named Boomer and a goddamn grizzly bear named Cheeseburger. Yes, son, you can have your own murderous pet bear named Cheeseburger, and it is awesome. New vehicles included a big rig with mounted machine guns and even a fighter plane. And again, like most of the games in the series, the visuals are often stunning. There's just something oddly picturesque about the backdrop in these games, which is kind of at odds with how chaotic and violent the combat can be. It even had a couple of really depressing endings, going against the whole black and white good and bad endings we'd seen in previous games. So overall, it's not a bad game and the kind that you can spend an entire day playing through, until you realise it's 2 AM in the morning and you're still out fly fishing trying to catch some trout. Up next is Far Cry Evolution, a sequel to Instincts released for both the Xbox and the Xbox 360 in 2006. This is the game that Far Cry Vengeance is based off, the only difference being that Evolution isn't complete rubbish. As a sequel to Instincts, it's pretty much the same in terms of the gameplay, with the same returning weapons and abilities. The reason this thing is higher than Instincts though, is that it actually gives you all of the powers from the get-go, and that makes a huge improvement. As soon as the campaign starts, you're able to run around like a man-cheater, murder guys with your claws and leap tall buildings in a single bound. It's also got an enjoyably cheesy story too. Jack's again returning to some kind of tropical island, this time with a woman named Cade, who pretty quickly jumps his bones in the game's intro. After an arms deal goes wrong, Jack and Cade are then on the run, dealing with the leader of a rebel faction named Semaru, who's got similar abilities to Jack.
I thought you'd never get here.
Evolution then just improves upon everything I disliked with Instincts. There's far more checkpoints now, so you're not replaying large chunks of levels over and over, and there's way more means to refill your adrenaline meter, thanks to the abundance of these consumable white flowers. And it's just more fun to play in general. The first level actually feels like a Far Cry game, with 3 mini islands you've got to explore to complete multiple objectives. It's about half the length of Far Cry Instincts 2, which is a good thing. So like a Tinder date, you're in and you're out. It's not perfect, but the most important factor is that it is fun to play. It's also one of the few games in the series I think would really benefit from a remaster or a port to the PC, and one of the only older games that I'd still highly recommend that people check out. So where do you go after you've been to tropical islands and the Nepalese mountains? Well, how about back to 10,000 BC during the Paleolithic era? That's what Ubisoft did in 2016 with Far Cry Primal, an entry in the series I think is highly underrated and underappreciated. This probably has one of the most badass storylines in the whole series too. So in this one, you're playing as a warrior named Takar, voiced by the same dude who did Adam Jensen in Deus Ex Human Revolution.
Palu, Sashwalim Shalom, Takar Hassan.
Yeah, and this guy's voice is so goddamn cool that he can spontaneously impregnate women just by talking. Anyway, Takar is a member of the Wenja tribe, and after his hunting party is BTFO'd by a saber-toothed tiger, he then heads to the land of Oros to rebuild a dwindling village. Butting heads with 2 enemy tribes in the process. You've got the Udam, a bunch of crazy cannibals, and then the Isilia, a bunch of crazy fire worshippers. You'll find and recruit a bunch of scattered Wenja, all who bring their own skills to the village. You've got a shaman, a huntress, and a crazy one-armed guy who pisses all over you, and I'm not making this up. The language everyone speaks is made up for the game, but still kind of based off an actual language from the same time period. So it's got this cool mix of historical accuracy with that usual madness you can expect in a Far Cry game. Along with the obligatory drug sequences. I mean, seriously, what is it with these games and drug sequences? Set back during the days before Wi-Fi, social media, and Roblox, instead of assault rifles and shotguns, you instead use spears, axes, and longbows. Even a slingshot's able to lay someone out in a single hit if you can hit them in the head. You can tame animals like bears, lions, and saber-toothed tigers. The latter you can even ride around like your very own personal battle cat. You're still taking over enemy outposts, but now these are small villages and bonfires, using a spirit owl to help you scout out locations, seeing as binoculars didn't exist back then. There's much more of a survival aspect to the game as well. You're always scavenging for rock, wood, meat, and other various resources to rebuild your village and repopulate it with your fellow tribesmen. Nighttime makes the world more dangerous, increasing the amount of natural predators, and go too far north without warm clothing and you'll even freeze to death. It also brought back fire as a bit of a more meaningful gameplay mechanic. Fire could be used as a light or a heat source, it could frighten off smaller animals, and also be used to burn your way through blocked paths. I think the biggest disappointment I had with this game though is its melee combat system, which is just complete rubbish. And it's a bit of a problem because you're going to need to use melee weapons a fair bit during combat. But there's only a light attack or a heavy attack, there's no blocking, dodging, parrying, nothing. And it's one of the biggest wasted opportunities. The other thing is that you are constantly under attack by wild animals in this game. I'd say almost every 20 or 30 seconds something is coming out of the goddamn shrubbery to attack you. And this is even during the daytime as well, it's not exclusive to nighttime. Now I know this takes place at a time when mankind was really low down on the food chain, but this is just ridiculous. Being constantly attacked by cougars, and not the good kind of cougars either, is about as fun as having your asshole waxed with sandpaper. Still, I think this game was a really cool way of trying to transfer the mechanics and the ideas of a Far Cry game into something that takes place thousands of years ago. And after replaying a bit of it again for this video, I think it might be one of my favourite games in the series. So overall, I think this one is pretty good. As a way of this series taking a break from jeeps, cars, assault rifles and rocket launchers, it's a welcome addition. And one of the entries in the series I think doesn't get enough recognition. Now I struggled a fair bit as to where to put the original Far Cry on this video, but the fact of the matter is, this game really hasn't aged all that well. But you've got to give credit where credit is due. The original Far Cry is one of those games alongside Doom 3 and Half-Life 2 that helped push and shove the first-person shooter genre into the 21st century. Running on what was an incredible looking engine at the time, it offered up truly humongous environments for the player to explore, allowing you to approach your objectives however you wanted to. And this kind of freedom in approaching each level was unprecedented at the time, and not to mention the engine looked gorgeous. I still find the water effects and the lighting to be really impressive. The lighting is so accurate to the point that you can see the individual leaves from trees as you move around.
How did you know that?
You're playing as a guy named Jack Carver traveling to a Micronesian island with a mysterious woman named Valerie.
Oh yeah, I'm sure this is going to be a lead pipe cinch.
Turns out the island's inhabited by mercenaries led by the mysterious Dr. Krieger.
I have taken the precaution of using my own DNA as a carrier for the strain.
Who's using the island as his own personal sandbox, creating horrible mutants he calls Trigens. Working with Valerie and a scientist named Doyle, you travel across the island, taking out the mercs and the Trigens as you cut a path to Krieger to put him out of commission. Now it does look like your standard first person shooter, but the gunplay was a little bit different to what you'd kind of expect, and combat could be really crushing at times. Shooting weapons has to be done by aiming down the sights, otherwise they're just really inaccurate, and some of the better guns in the game you can't aim down sights and move around at the same time. So you've got to kind of aim by planting yourself in one spot like you're some kind of bright shirt wearing gun turret. Your best friend's going to be your binoculars, which tags enemies on your radar, and eventually a pair of Predator style goggles that highlight someone's body heat. I think the biggest issue this game has though are those insane difficulty spikes throughout the second half of the campaign. Most of the earlier levels are consistent, and taking on these brain dead mercs is actually pretty fun. But it's in stark contrast to the second half of the campaign, when you're up against all of these annoying Trigen. Yeah, these guys are some of the most annoying enemies in any first-person shooter, perhaps ever. Though nothing puts those little assholes down quicker than a jackhammer shotgun to the face, and fewer things are as satisfying. I also hate the swimming controls in this game. Whoever thought it was a good idea to make the screen go up and down the whole time when you're swimming like you're a fucking dolphin should have their head implanted up their own ass.
I'm heading out!
Still, we can't deny the influence this game had on the industry and how much it helped push other developers to follow suit. And out of this we got the Crysis series and of course the Far Cry franchise also developed into what it is today. Time has definitely been a cruel mistress to this one, but I think it is still worth playing.
Found them!
Let's show them how cyber commandos get it done.
Mark 4 style, motherfucker!
Next, we've got Far Cry Blood Dragon, a sort of standalone spin-off title to Far Cry 3, which came out of nowhere at the time and pretty much blew everyone away. Set in the dystopian year of 2007, as opposed to the dystopian year of 2020, Blood Dragon is a love letter to action movies from the 80s and the 90s. The soundtrack is composed by an Aussie guy named Power Glove, reminiscent of some of the stuff that Brad Fiedel worked on for the Terminator films. But it doesn't even stop there. One of the first guns you get is Robocop's pistol. There's a lever-action shotgun called the Galleria 1991 that's a direct reference to Terminator 2. And the main character, Rex Power Colt, is voiced by Michael Biehn, who played Kyle Reese in Terminator and Corporal Hicks in Aliens.
You're right. I need to even the score.
For Spider?
No. For humanity.
And he also has some hilarious one-liners that intentionally often don't make any sense.
Be careful, Rex. That place is filled with death.
What kind of death?
The dangerous kind, Rex.
The opening level on the chopper gunning down enemies uses music from the opening scene from Predator. The end sequence when you're riding on the back of a cybernetic blood dragon uses music from the final fight in Rocky IV. The end credits song is taken from the cult film The Miami Connection, and this is all just really scratching the surface. Outside of all of that though, it's really just a more simplistic, stripped back version of Far Cry 3 that's been crammed with fan service. The core of this game is like a watered down version of the third game, with less to see and do, and the whole thing really relying on its numerous pop culture references to get by, which it mostly does.
Just let me kill people, damn it.
I think the free roaming aspect in this might be the most fun in the entire series, because you move at a super fast speed and take no fall damage either. You can just kinda zip all over the map, stabbing dudes in the back and collecting VHS tapes.
I just dropped in to say fuck you.
Not to mention the final couple of missions are just amazing.
Hello, Portis.
I'm equipped with a hydraulically powered Terror 4000 cannon and titanium trauma plates.
Riding on the back of that armored blood dragon to the soundtrack of Rocky and Ivan Drago beating the piss out of each other is one of the most awesome sequences in any game I've ever played.
I'm firing my laser.
The only major problem is that it doesn't have any kind of end boss. The big final battle against Sloan is seen in a cinematic and the whole thing ends very abruptly. The other reason that it's not higher up on the list is that you can finish it within 5 to 6 hours, and unlock everything there is to see and do, giving it very little replayability. It's not really a huge fault though, considering it wasn't really meant to be a full-length game in the first place. But it is kind of hard to compare it to the other games where you can easily get 20 or even 30 hours worth of gameplay before it starts to become stale.
Why?
If Ubisoft ever want to really revitalise this series, or just start making buildings out of stacks of $100 bills, then all they really need to do is make a sequel to this thing.
Sayonara, sushi! Yeah!
Finally, we're in the endgame with Far Cry 2, and I do want to say that I thought long and hard about this, and at the end of the day, this was always the ranking this game deserved. Released in 2008, it's a really early example of the genre of open world shooters we'd get bombarded with in the coming years, with a large world to explore, a day and a night cycle, and NPCs patrolling about all ready to be murdered by the player. In Far Cry 2, you choose to play as one of half a dozen different expats heading to Africa during the midst of a civil war. You're in the country for barely 5 minutes before you're caught in the crossfire between two warring factions, and on top of that, you find out you've just had a particularly nasty bout of malaria. What follows is the video game equivalent of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo, where you pit these two militia groups against each other doing jobs for both sides, but screwing them over at the same time. Your ultimate goal is to find and kill the Jackal, a notorious arms dealer supplying weapons to both sides, but that soon goes out the window when you realise there's more to his character than meets the eye.
Do you understand what I'm saying? Nobody kills me.
And no, he's not Jack Carver from the first game, despite what those stupid fan theories think.
How did you know that?
Far Cry 2's gameplay shows the beginnings of what would become the norm for the industry, with things like the fast travelling and the numerous side missions, but it lacks the option to free roam after finishing the main story, which nowadays would be an egregious offence. But there's still a fair bit of stuff that holds up here, especially the tech side of things, like the realistic fire effect that reacts to factors like wind speed and direction, weapon degradation where guns are going to jam up and then literally explode in your hands, not to mention a seamless night and day cycle and various animals that run around the environment. Instead of cash for completing your missions, you were paid instead in blood diamonds, which you then used to buy new weapons and attachments. Slowly earning all of these weapons and unlocking these safe houses made me feel like I was some malaria-stricken version of John Matrix from Commando, pulling guns off the wall at one of my safe houses like it was some kind of movie montage. And the inclusion of these buddy characters to help you out made the whole thing feel less lonely.
I put in my time with the Israeli Defense Force. I know how to handle myself, plus I know how to get things. Know what I mean?
But it ain't all sunshine and dust-covered roses. Far Cry 2 might have some of the hallmarks of what you'd come to expect in an open-world shooter, but they're not all that refined, much like the blood diamonds abundant throughout the game itself. There's no instant fast travel system in the game, for instance. You first had to go to a nearby bus stop and then catch the bus like a complete loser. But even then, it wouldn't drop you exactly where you needed to go. You'd still have to drive a little bit more to get to your destination. Sometimes this could take you 10 or 15 minutes to do alone. Your character suffering from malaria was a big component to the game too, but you'd always run out of medicine during one of the main story missions, which would again be another 20 or 30 minute detour to go and get some more from a nearby doctor. Unlike in Far Cry 3 and all the games that came after it, there's no real visual representation of how visible you are to enemies when you're trying to be stealthy, almost making it pointless to even try. Also, the mission variety was really lacking, usually just involved driving somewhere and then killing someone, then spending another 15 or 20 minutes to drive back to get the next mission.
Just get to the point.
Your buddies would also offer up an alternative strategy to every mission, but this was just another 15 or 20 minutes so detour.
This book you take, it will scare the captain very badly. He will not waste time driving around. He will go straight to his police post and hide.
However, it is one of the most immersive games I've ever played with a fantastic atmosphere. And if you can allow yourself to ignore some of the game's shortcomings, like outposts that respawn enemies within literal seconds, and some of the healing animations that make no sense, well, it's still a hell of an experience.
Just get to the point.
The way that it influenced and shaped the genre for years to come can't be ignored. And although this is my personal favourite game in the series, I can't deny that really it's just a prototype for Far Cry 3, which in my opinion is the game that managed to bring the whole thing together and still the best game in the entire series.
Oh, Jesus.
Oh, fuck you!
Far Cry 3 I think probably had one of the most hyped up releases for an open world game at the time, aside from maybe Skyrim in 2011. And for good reason, this thing is responsible for pretty much solidifying the open world shooter template for years to come. Playing as the totally relatable and likable Jason Brody, you're holidaying with your supermodel girlfriend and your buddies in the Pacific Ocean before you're all captured by pirates and taken hostage.
Why aren't you laughing now like you did up there? What, is this not fun anymore? Have I failed to entertain you?
Things then go from bad to worse. Your big bro is killed, and after quickly making a nemesis with the enigmatic Vas, you escape from your captors and team up with the native Rakyat tribe. Turns out all of your friends have been kidnapped and you'll need all of the help you can get to rescue them and escape the island. Thanks to a bit of jungle magic, the Rakyat emblazons your arm with a tribal tattoo, which serves as a visual way of tracking the player's upgrades throughout the campaign, but also serving as a narrative means to symbolize your connection with the island. You see, Jason is a bit of a basic bitch. He's never fired a gun or even killed someone. I mean, what a pussy. As the game goes on though, you unlock new abilities and weapons and turn into an absolute killing machine. Eventually you'll be stalking pirates from the bushes with a combat bow, sneaking up behind them and shanking them through the chest with a goddamn machete. It had a much improved stealth system from the previous game too. Now you could hide in bushes and you'd get a visual aid if you were being seen, in the form of a semicircle that slowly filled up, a mechanic they'd recycle for every Far Cry game afterwards. Along with the use of the compound bow, a bow which has again appeared in pretty much every single Far Cry game in one way or another, and is easily one of the most skill-based and satisfying weapons to use. Far Cry 3 had some really cool characters too. Undercover CIA operative Sam Becker, for instance, creepy Australian rapist Buck.
Let's get down to brass tacks. You must be Jason Brody.
Straight up crazy jungle bitch Citra, who is the video game poster child for don't stick your dick in crazy. And of course, Vas himself.
I'm sorry. I don't like the way you are looking at me. Okay?
Vas is one of the all-time greatest video game villains, becoming even more interesting when you start to learn his backstory. He's kinda like Darth Vader, if Darth Vader was a meth-addicted pirate that tried to fuck his own sister. I'd kind of like to believe the fan theories too, that the new kid we're seeing in Far Cry 6 is a young Vas. Vas and Gus from Breaking Bad in the same game, I think the veins in my nuts might actually explode from that.
Fuck you!
Apparently this dude's performance was so good that they modeled the appearance of the character and his dialogue off the actor himself. The ending of the game had Jason realizing that he turned into a killing machine, murdering pirates and so ingrained into the Rakyat tribe that he didn't even want to leave the island anymore. Which was a real meta moment for the player too, having just spent the last 30 hours or so with the campaign, leveling up and probably becoming addicted to the gameplay loop. When you're off doing missions for all of these ancillary characters or taking over outposts, you often forget that you're just supposed to be securing the means for getting your friends off the island. Once you've accomplished that, there's no real reason for you to want to stay, but yet you do.
What?
But unlike Far Cry 2, when you'd finished the campaign, you could still go back out there and then complete everything the island had left to offer. And yeah, son, the sheer amount of things to do here is just insane, and everything always served a purpose in helping you towards your goal. You could hunt all the different animals and craft new equipment. Taking over outposts would give you fast travel points and new missions. And climbing radio towers would expose the map and also unlock new guns. And later in the game you'd even unlock a goddamn wingsuit.
What?
But there are some pretty notable downgrades between this and Far Cry 2. Weapon degradation, which is something that I really enjoyed from the last game, is just completely removed. The fire mechanics, where you could burn down half a forest with a single Molotov cocktail, is also severely dialed down here too. But I think the general quality of life improvements that Far Cry 3 introduces makes it a way more enjoyable game to play on the whole. As a tech demo, Far Cry 2 beats it hands down, but as a cohesive, fully fleshed out enjoyable shooter, Far Cry 3 I think nudges it out to be the best of the bunch.
What's going on back there? Traffic control!
And that brings us to the end of the list for the Far Cry games from the worst to the best. If you'd like to see more videos like this in the future of me ranking a series from worst to best, then let me know in the comments section below. Thanks for watching.
Sayonara, sushi! Yeah!